Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates. Welcome to reading Machiavelli's Prince. Well, today we're going into the second section. The logic of the Prince is divided into kind of four sections. I got this idea from one of our teachers, Leo Paul de Alvarez, when we studied with him. And in fact, he puts it in his book, The Machiavellian Enterprise, that it was basically the first 11 book chapters of The Prince deals with the prince. This is what he promised to do in chapter one. Now, in this next three chapters, he's going to be dealing with the question of arms and man. So let's go look at starting with chapter 12, focusing on what the question of arms, right? Which is, again, how many kinds of militia there are, and about the mercenary soldiers, right? This is the problem that here. And you get to the first question right away. One, militia, right? May mean, the problem with the word militia is militia may mean military service or warfare, right? Or it may refer to the military things in general. Okay, so therefore it may read to the military service or to warfare or to the military things in general. Thus the different kinds of militia may reflect the different modes of thinking, modes of ordering one of man's most important activities, warfare, or to the different modes of ordering military things. So therefore, the different how do you order the modes, the military, and how do you mode this? Therefore, the term of militia here is broad. It is both terms of what he says, that it is the military service or to warfare, or refers to military things in general, right? That's why he words the word militia there. Militia meant the people who it was the guards. It was the civic guards in society. Usually the people's self-defense force, right? But then in some societies, royal societies, the militia was often the local people, local regional arms, the people like this who defend the city against violence or crime. Um, this is what this double meaning of this word. I mean, the original origin of the word militia meant. Um, and this is why he wants to say the ordering of militia may refer here, the different kinds of militia, right, may refer to the question of ordering. That's how he gets into this thing. So let's go right into the first paragraph here. Having discussed in particular all the qualities of those principates, which in the beginning I proposed to reason upon, and having considered in some part the causes of their well or ill being, and having shown the modes which modes with which many have sought to acquire and keep them, it remains for me to discuss generally the offenses and defenses which can be adapted by each of those above named. So, in other words, what is he doing here? He says, we've talked about the modes, right? And we talked about the different modes of principalities and the different characteristics, right? And uh, uh, now he says what? I propose, right? To discuss, right? He said originally back in chapter one, right? And considered, the causes of their being their well-being and their ill-being, right? Why they're healthy or not, and having showed the modes with, with which many have sought to acquire and keep them, right? This is what he's talked about so far, right? Now it remains to the what? It remains for me to discuss generally the offenses and defenses which can be adopted by of those cities. So therefore, so it goes right in. We have said above how necessary it is that a prince have good foundations, right? Otherwise, he comes to ruin of necessity. So we have said, in other words, previously he's dealt with the question of the foundations, right? The principal foundations which all states have, whether old, new, okay, sorry, I got that diverse, okay. In other words, the principal foundations which all states have, whether new, old, mixed, right, are good laws and good arms. So, in other words, he goes, the principal foundations of any state rest on two things, he says, well, regardless whether they're new, whether they're old, whether they're mixed, is good laws and good arms, right? Now he's going to have a very interesting thing. This is a trick he's going to pull here, because he will not discuss good laws. Nowhere in the Prince the good discussion of good laws are really addressed in any sense. But instead, he goes, so therefore, two of the principal things, good laws and good arms. And because there cannot be good laws where where there are not good arms, and where there are good arms, there needs must be good laws. I shall omit the reasoning on laws and speak of arms. So what is he's kind of made he's implicit argument. He says what? Good arms and good laws, right? He says because there cannot be good laws where there's not good arms. So in other words, without good laws, you can have good laws, but if they don't have a good arms, they're not going to be good laws. Okay, so therefore, there can be no good laws without good arms. Cannot be good laws where there are not good arms, right? So no good arms, no good laws. Second, where there are good arms, there needs to be good laws. So so therefore, good arms preclude the good laws that made the good arms available. So therefore, he will speak of good arms because the arms are a better case, right? He says, "This is I will omit the reasoning on laws and speak of arms." So let's stop. He gives this argument here. Now you can see there's a problem here. Okay, how did this nice trick, nice rhetorical trick? It's logical in a sense, but there's something missing. How do the good arm? How do the good laws come to be on their own? What is first? The laws are arms. Arms are laws. Okay, you know, um, it's something that he purposely does it this way. He sets up the two ifs, right, and then therefore uses that to the conclusion of that to justify his discussion of only arms and not laws. I say then that arms with which a prince defends his states are either his own, mercenary, auxiliary, or mixed. So therefore, there's one, two, three, four types of molds. One's own, mercenaries, you hire for this, auxiliaries, other allies, basically, and mixed. Mercenary and auxiliary arms are useless and dangerous. And if one keeps his state founded on mercenary arms, he will never be at rest or secure, because those arms are disunited, ambitious, without discipline, unfaithful, vowous among friends, cowardly, cowardly among enemies. They do not fear God, nor do they keep faith with men. There's that faith with men quote. On occasion, on a concession between arms and faith and the Articles of War, right? Book 7 of Art of War, and Discourses 1, chapter 11. So they do not keep their faith mercenary. Ruin is only delayed. Ruin is delayed only as long as the attack is delayed, such that one is despoiled by them in peace, by enemies at war. So therefore, he's saying, what does he say here? He's basically saying that mercenary and auxiliary arms are kind of what? Useless, he says. Why? Because he says now he focuses that useless. But then if one keeps his states founded on mercenary arms, right? Now they're useless. Both of these are useless. But then he focuses not on this, but he focuses on mercenary arms here. He says that both auxiliary and mercenary arms are useless and dangerous. But then the focus of the argument here is surely just mercenary arms. He says mercenary arms are what he will rest or never be secured. Because why? Because these arms are disunited, ambitious, without discipline, unfaithful, valiant among friends, cowardly among enemies. They do not fear God, nor keep faith with men, and ruin is only delayed as the attack is delayed, and once such that one is despoiled by them by peace. They gobble your food up, use your money, but then in war, your enemies are easily destroy you by enemies in war. The cause of this is that they have no love nor any cause to keep them in the field, other than a bit of the stipend, which is not sufficient to make them want to die for you. Now, this is the you here is, I think, this is the second person familiar here. Is the personal you, right? That it's not sufficient to die for you. They're not going to die for you for little money. In other words, the cause of this is that they have no love. They have no love, nor any cause to stay in the field, other than the bit of money, the bit of stipend, and it does not. That's not sufficient. They are very willing to be your soldiers while you do not make war, but when war comes, they flee or go away. So they have no desire to die for you. And that's the interesting point here. But they'll do it for money, but once the war comes, they're not going to, money's not good enough. I should I should not have to work very hard to persuade anyone of this point. For the ruin of in Italy today at the time he's talking about, right? The time he's writing at this time, is caused by nothing other than her reliance for many years on mercenary arms. In other words, the Italian city-states, the Italian cities, the Italian political orders have relied mostly on mercenary arms rather than their own arms, the standing armies. Because why? Because the mercenary arms played a role in the church, particularly with the church, right? This is that idea. These arms certainly did some service for a few, and they may have seemed valorous when among themselves. But when the foreigner came, they showed what they were. Hence, Charles, King of France, was allowed to take Italy with chalk. Now, this is a reference, the expression attributed to the French historians Philippe de Comans to Alexander the Sixth. The French, according to the Pope, needed only chalk and wooden spurs to conquer Italy. Chalk to mark the margins and wooden spurs to prick the mules forward. Right? Let's take Italy with chalk. And he who said that our sins were the cause of this said the truth. Now this is I think this is Savonarola, right? Savonarola, who preached on November 1st, 1491, All Saints' Day, that Charles VIII's entrance into Italy was a scourge of God to the Italians in general and to the Felicians in particular, right? He's right that this was a sin, right? Said the truth, but they were not certain. But they were certainly not those that which he believed, but those which I have narrated. In other words, they did. In other words, God punished them. In other words, it says that the sins are the cause of this invasion, right? Not the sins that he thought. You know, they weren't. They were certainly not those sins. The sins, the errors, the mistakes. Were not the mistakes that he believed were the cause of this. In other words, they were certainly not those that he believed, but those which I have narrated. In other words, they're relying on mercenary arms, and because they were sins of the prince, not the people, they have also suffered the penalty. In other words, they have, because they were sins of the prince, they also have suffered the penalty here. The princes were suffered in that sense. I wish to demonstrate better the infelicity, in other words, the lack of faith um, of these arms. Mercenary captains are either men excellent in arms or they're not. So you can have, in other words, first, the captains, this is Capito 7, the meaning of captain, what is meant by the chief, the boss leader. Mercenary military captains are they're either excellent in arms or they're not. If they are, you cannot trust them because they will always aspire to their own greatness by either oppressing you, their patron, or by oppressing others quite contrary to your intentions. So if he's a capable man, military man, again, remember the danger of this. This is the danger of Milan. What happened? The force Scorza, the Scorza who took control of Milan, because they, in other words, the militia kept. Remember the examine of the Froli, Freli, where Ludovico kind of gets empowered by he's being the mercenary captain. Right, the mercenary captain, if he's capable, if he's good, he's dangerous. Why? Because it's his ambition, his greatness. They will aspire to their own greatness, either oppressing you or oppressing others quite contrary to your intentions. But if their captain is not virtuous, you are ordinary ruin. So, in other words, if they're virtuous, if they're good, they will ruin you. And if they're not good, they'll ruin you. They ruin you by what? Either taking over, removing you, conspiring against you, or conspiring against others against your intention. And then then you get the negative impact of their situation, right? And if one responds that this will happen with anyone who has arms in hand, mercenary or not, I will reply that as arms are employed either by a prince or by a republic, that a prince ought in person to take the office of the captain. A republic has to send its citizens. And when it sends one who does not, uh, and when it sends one who does not prove a worthy man, it ought to replace him. And when he is worthy, keep him within the laws, so that he does not overstep the mark. Okay, so therefore, this is the idea that the prince ought to go himself. In a republic, they have to send citizens. But then what is it? If he's not worthy, remove him. If he's worthy, okay, keep him, uh, 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 but keep him under the law. In other words, make sure he does not keep him within the law, so he does not overstep the mark. And by experience, one sees that a single prince and armed republics make very great progress, and mercenary arms do nothing. Do nothing but damage, nothing but damage. And a republic armed with its own arms is more difficultly brought to obey of its, in other words, brought to obey only, okay. And a republic armed with its own arms is more difficult, is more difficulty brought with more difficulty brought to obey one of its own than one which is armed with foreign arms. In other words, it's going to be it's harder to coup. It's harder for the citizens is armed with their own arms. it's more difficult for someone to take control of the society, which is, in other words, brought to obey one's difficulty to obey one of its citizens. In other words, if it's the citizen will not just one citizen will be forced to taking over. In other words, one citizen can put himself above the rest. An armed society makes it difficult, whereas mercenary is armed with foreign arms. It's easy. They're not capable of defending themselves. Rome and Sparta were for many centuries armed and free. The Swiss are armed to the highest degree and free to the highest degree. The Carthaginians are an example of an ancient mercenary arms, and they were oppressed by their mercenary soldiers when the first war with the Romans ended. And even though the Carthaginians had their own citizens as even though the Carthaginians had their own citizens as leaders, in other words, the Carthaginians are the Romans and Sparta were the ancient examples that they were for the arms and free. The Swiss are a modern example for him, and they're the highest degree armed, and they're armed to the highest degree and freed to the highest degree. The Carthaginians are the example of this, are the ancient mercenary arms, but they were oppressed by their mercenary soldiers when the first war with the Romans ended, right? Even though the Carthaginians had their own leaders, right? After the death of Epidemius, Philip of Macedon was made captain of their people by the Thebans. And after he won victory, he took away their liberties, right? So therefore, in other words, Epidemius, the great leader of the Thebans, when he died, they made Philip his underling captain by the people, right? And then once he won victory, he took away their freedom in that sense. The Milians hired Francisco Sforza against the Venetians after the Duke Filippo died. After overcoming their enemies at Caravigno, he joined with them in order to oppress his patrons, the Milanese, right? That's the established the Scorsa's rule of Milan, right? Scorsa, his father, having been hired by Queen Genovini of Naples, then left her in one stroke disarmed, right? She was, Scorsa, his father, having been hired by Queen Giovanni's of Naples, so I left him stroke disarmed. Whereupon, to save the kingdom, she was constrained to throw herself in the lap of King of Aguilar. In other words, she then, because once he left unarmed, she had to go to the Spanish king for help. Because once she lost her mercenary arm, she was forced to die on and hence the Spanish claim, right? The King of Aragon. So therefore, this is the again the modern examples of the dangers of mercenary arms. And if the Venetians and Florentines have had in the past increased their imperium with these arms, in other words, now what about the example of the Venetians and Florence? Both of these use mercenary arms, and they have increased their imperium with these arms. He says, yet their captains have not made had not then made themselves princes, but have indeed defended them. I respond that the Florentines in this case have been favorites of chance. In other words, in other words, these two cases does not prove anything, because he's going to say the Florentines are an example of chance. For uh, for uh, for of the captains who were virtuous and therefore to be feared, some won no victories. So there was a victor. Only talk about the victorious ones, right? Who were virtuous, only the virtuous ones, therefore to be feared. Some of these captains, some won no victories. Some had opposition. Others turned their ambitions elsewhere. So none of them turned their ambitions. Pardon. Allergy, man, allergy bad. You can hear it in my lung. It's like, ugh. In other words, they had no, they of the people who had virtues of good talent, ability, none, what some had no victories, right? He said some had oppositions, others turned their ambitions elsewhere. The one who the one who did not win any victories was Giovanni Acuto, Mr. John Hawkwood, and because he never won any battles, the Florentines could not know his faith. But everyone will confess that had he won, the Florentines would have been at his discretion. The Sforza always held, or said, the Sforza always had the Brancini as their adversaries, so that each watched the other. Right? Francesco turned all his attention, his ambition against Lombardy, Braccio against the church, and the kingdom of Naples. But in other words, in other words, these two guys, both these guys, the Scorsa had the Bracci as their adversaries, right? And they watched each other, and therefore Francesco turned his ambition towards Lombardy, and Bracco against the church and his king, Naples. But let us come to that which recently occurred. So what is that? That he goes, what the Florentines made Paolo Vintilli, a most prudent man, their captain. He had, from private fortune, attained to a very great reputation. Had that man conquered Pisa, no one could deny it that it would have been needful for the Florentines to stay with him. For if he had gone over to soldier for his enemies, they would have no remedy. And if they kept him, they would have to obey him. So therefore, this other one is this example. Therefore, but he was lucky; he didn't conquer Pisa. If he conquered Pisa, they would have had to obey him. Why? Because if he went over to the enemies, then there'd be no remedy. Right? This is the danger of that situation. And if one considers the progress of the Venetians, so the Venetians, now, he spent. It starts with the Venetians. Last paragraph. He starts with Venetians are this example. They're not to be. Look at the Venetians and the Florentines. About their examples is not that they have had. They've used mercenaries and they had relatively gained territories. Right. They gained their imperium. Right. Therefore, but he says that they didn't happen. He spent most of the paragraph dealing with Florence, explaining why the Florentine case now. Now he's turning to Venice. Consider the progress of the Venetians. One sees that they acted securely and gloriously as long as they made war themselves. And this was before they engaged their enterprise on land. Okay? In other words, the Venetians when they were waging their colonial campaign, their war on sea, they were doing it themselves. They acted securely and gloriously as long as because in other words, they acted securely and gloriously as long as they made war themselves, their own arms. And this is before they engaged the enterprise on land, he says. With our own gentry and armed plebs, they acted very virtuously. With their own gentry and armed plebs, they acted very virtuously. But when they began to fight on land, they lost their virtue and followed Italian customs and war. So therefore, they followed, instead of they abandoned their virtue, they lost their virtue and followed Italian customs in land war. In the beginning of their augmentation on land, they had a little state there. They had a little state. Now, this is an interesting 14. The words, in other words, this is again the little state there, and had a great reputation. So their colonial part, right? They had little to fear from their captains, but as they grew, as they did under Camigliano, they had a sample of this error, for they saw that he was most virtuous. They had fought. They had fought the Duke of Milan under his command, and on the other hand, knowing how he had grown cold towards the war, they judged that because he no longer wished to conquer, they could no longer conquer with him in command. And yet they would not let him go without losing what they have acquired. Thus they were necessitated, in order to secure themselves, to kill him. Okay, so therefore, this is the red. The comic, this is the example of what happened. Their captain here is example. Francisco Busson, Count of Caringo, was executed in May 1432 for treason, which the Venetian state believed was the only reasonable explanation for the coldness towards the war against Milan. His coldness was such that in the spring of 1432, he refused to accept the proffered surrenders of a town and a castle. On the Venetian suspicions of their mercenaries, that sense, that they killed them, right? He'd grown quite, he no longer wished to conquer, that they could no longer conquer with him, right? So they killed him, right? So they were necessitated to kill him. They then, as their captains, Bartolomeo di Bergamero and Roberto di San Severo, the Count of Pigano, and the like, and with them they had to fear defeat, not their captain's gain, as it indeed came to pass at Villa, where in one battle they lost what with so much toil they had acquired in 800 years. Okay, so there's one battle that, in other words, in other words, at 17, right? This is that line at 17. The Battle of Valini, known as the Battle of Agandalo, right, 1509, was the first of a serious was the first of serious battles of Italy was to suffer from on. Chivalrous war of the Congarde came to an end. Venice, as a result of the battle, lost all her remaining mainland possessions. There was that one battle, everything they gained slowly, they lost quickly. So what they acquired in 800 years, but the toil, small toil, was lost at one battle. And that was because there was a change of it was no longer the courteous but ruthless fighting in that sense. That battle, Lily, right? And because I have come with many examples to Italy, with my many examples to Italy, which has been for many years governed by mercenary arms, I want to discuss them more from on high. In other words, now he's going to shift his discussion. He says, "I've come to with my examples to Italy, from which for many years I've governed by mercenary arms. I want to discuss them more from on high, so that having seen the origins and progress of them, one can better correct them." Right. So we can let's see how they are from low to the high thing, and against the U here. The U here is the courteous use, the proper, use, courteous here, second person here, not the familiar, but the courteous. You have then to understand. You have then to understand. In the recent times, as soon as Italy began to rebel against the empire here is the Holy Roman Empire, right? The emperor, right? And the Pope gained much reputation in temporal affairs. So therefore, they were rebelling against the cities were rebelling against the emperor, and the Pope gained reputation in temporal affairs. years, Italy was divided into more states. For many of the great cities took up arms against their nobles, who, as favorites of the emperor, had formerly oppressed them. And the church favored the cities so she could gain for herself reputation in temporal matters. And in many of the other cities, their own citizens became princes, right? This is that line about the citizens became princes in some of these cities. Um, the names, this is where the names Guelph, Wealth, and Ghibelline or way begin, right? Where this is like this again. This is like the famous case of Romeo and Juliet, the two cities fighting, right? The two families, different political parties in that sense. These are the struggles, right? The names Guelph and Ghibelline were attached to the papal and imperial parties, respectively, the factions, right? Struggling for their control of Italy. According to Daniel Wiley in the Italian City Republics, um, the term comes to use in the reign of Frederick II. That's 1220 to 1250, but became attached to the anti and pro imperial parties only in 1256, when the Guelph party became identified with the claims of the House of Agenau, and Welf was the family name of Otto IV, the Saxon opponent to Frederick II. Wallabine was the name of the Hoffenstaff Castle, which was used as the battle cry. It should be noted that the names Guelph and Ghibelline continued in use long after the original conflict, which had brought them into being, originally had originally disappeared. Originally, the party of the merchants and the people were the Guelphs, and that of the feudal nobility were the Ghibellines. But in Florence, at the end of the 14th century, the Guelphs had become the oligarchic party, and thus in 1378 these occurred with plebeian uprisings and of the Campi against the Guelphs, right? So therefore, the nature of the factions here switched. So therefore, that's why some citizens became there in their own parties. That the citizens became princes in that sense. They became originally things. Whereupon Italy came almost completely into the hands of the church and a few republics. And these priests and other citizens, having no knowledge on the use of arms, began to hire foreigners. Right, that's the problem. The priests and the citizens had no knowledge of it. They hired foreigners. The first whom gave reputation to this kind of militia was Albert, Albergio di la Conora, a Romanigo. A Romanigo. Now, 20 is the footnote. I'll talk about this again. Yuck. Alberto di Baccano, Count of Cornino, founded the Company of St. George, right? St. George, the first Italian company of mercenaries. It was he who reintroduced the mounted soldiers, or the man at arms, and the tactics suitable for such forces. That is to say, he founded the military mode and orders followed by Braccio, Sforza, and others. He died in 1409. Machiavelli describes the situation in Italy into which Albertino came as follows, right? And this is from the Florentine Histories, book one, book one, chapter 34. They were in Italy in these times many soldiers, English, German, and Breton, led partly by those princes who at various times came into Italy, and who partly were sent by the pontiff when they were in Avignon. Right, with these, all the Italian princes waged for some time their wars until finally arose Ludovico di Conoi, a Romanago, who formed a company of Italian soldiers named after St. George. Their virtue and their discipline took away the reputation of foreign arms in a short time, and it gave back to the Italians, of whom then the princes of Italy, in their wars between themselves, availed themselves. This is the soldiers of the mercenaries. So originally they were foreign soldiers, but then the rise of the Company of St. John, this made the Italians feel of this, and therefore that changed the situation. Alberto di Colonna, a Romango. From his school there descended, among others, Braccio and Scorza, who in their time were the arbiters of Italy. So Braccio and Scorza, the two leading schools of mercenaries, and they were the what? The arbiters of all Italy. After them came all the others, who until our time have governed these arms, mercenary arms, all the families that came under, right? As the result of their virtue had been that Italy had been overrun by Charles, plundered by Louis, violated by Ferdinand, and assaulted by the Swiss. Now, this is very graphic. It's overrun by Charles, plundered by Louis, right, violated by Ferdinand, insulted by the Swiss, who, with their infantry, defeated the Italian mercenaries at Navarro in 1500. When Ludovico Sforza was driven out of Milan a second time, right, and at Ravenna in 1512, when it came as a surprise to everyone, the Swiss turned against the French and thus saved Pope Julius and the Holy League, which united the Pope, Venice and Spain against France. Right, they kicked him out. Right, so that. Whew, um, so therefore, that's the whole thing. Insulted by the Swiss. In other words, mercenary armies. The virtue of these arms, right, is what? The result of their virtue had been in other words, this is an insult. The virtue of the militia arms. What was it? What their rise? Their rise. He said that they became that this. The metaphor is a virtue. In other words, Alberto and the mercenary arms had a virtue. They were better than the foreign arms, right, at the time that was relied on, and they became the arbiters of things, right. From these orders from Alberigo comes the Bracco and Sforzas, right, and then all those after them, right. Those came after them, but then what happened? Well, their virtue becomes the disaster he describes here. The order with they, now this is a 22 is a weird they there. Now this is clearly mean they, the mercenaries. The order that they had kept had been first to take away the reputation of the infantry to gain reputation for themselves. In other words, this is the orders which they, the mercenaries, they took away infantry. As I mentioned, he says the foreign soldiers relied on horse, men at arms, not infantry. They did this because, with being men without state and dependent on their own industry, they were unable to feed many, and a few infantry could not give them reputation. They therefore reduced to horse, and a susceptible number of these they could feed themselves and gain honors. They were therefore reduced to such terms that in an army of 20,000 soldiers, one could not find 2,000 infantry. Besides this, they used all their industry to free themselves and their soldiers from toil and fear. They did not kill themselves in skirmishes, but they took each other prisoners without ransom. They did not attack towns at night, nor did the towns attack the tents. They they did not they did not attack the tents, right? They did not attack towns at night, nor did the towns attack the tents. They constructed neither stockades nor trenches around their camp. They did not campaign in winter. And all these things were permitted by their military orders, which were founded by them to avoid, as had been said, toils and dangers, such that they conducted Italy into slavery. They conducted Italy into slavery and contempt. So that's how he ends. He says, their virtue, the virtue of the Italian, their character. This last paragraph talks about the order which they kept, their order. This is their virtue. A virtue, this is kind of an ordering of things, right? Their virtue results in their demise, right? Well, he explains how their demise, because what they don't like infantry. You can't have a lot of infantry if you're going to pay for yourself and do it like this. It's hard to get. They don't have enough money to sustain a large infantry. Therefore they could sustain horse. They can send 1,000, 2,000 horse easily, a couple thousand horse, a couple hundred, a couple things, and be sizable to achieve a reputation. But that means no infantry. So therefore they deny infantry. So therefore everyone has these horse units, men at arms. Therefore there's not enough infantry to fight wars. And infantry is the king. The true war is won by infantry. This is always the case, right? Therefore they could not have enough arms. And they not only do this, they create rules that they don't want to kill each other. They're not going to kill each other like this. They create a situation where they free themselves from toil. They use their industry, their skills, and their things to free themselves and their soldiers from toils and fear. So he says they didn't kill themselves in skirmishes, but they took the other prisoners without ransom, right? They did not attack towns. The towns did not attack the tents. They didn't construct stockades, no trenches around their camps. They don't campaign in winter. And this is why, because their military orders were found to avoid, that is, toil and dangers. And because of that, because they've done this, their character is such, they've conducted Italy into slavery and contempt, which is that they've been overrun by Charles, plundered by Louis, violated by Ferdinand, and insulted by the Swiss. That's the specific of it. So let's stop here. This has been difficult. My voice is going, I understand. So let's go. If you like it, hit the like button. If you didn't like it, don't hit the like button, but say no. If you really liked it, please share it on social media. Put your share it on share it far and wide. Share it to your friends. If you have any comments or questions or things like this, I should say that first. My brain is kind of a fried allergy stuff. Just put it up there. Any comments or questions about this chapter about arms, and I'll respond to it. If you have not yet subscribed, or you're new here, you checked it out, like what you're doing, consider subscribing. It helps to grow the algorithm. We're kind of getting to a magic number soon. I hope I hit it. So please consider subscribing. It does help. Another thing you can do is, you want to check me out on social media, you can do so with links below, the URLs to the social media links below. If you want to know more about me, check out my scholarship and know more about me as a researcher and check out my scholarship, you can do so with the academic social media links below the social media links. And if you want to help me to do what I do in a sense, want to financially assist, you can do so through Patreon or Subscribestar, or buy one of the books that I list below my currently available books. Either order through bookstore or order through an online distributor like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever, or just maybe even by the publisher itself. Well, that's it. We'll turn next to chapter 13, and we'll see you there. Okay? Take care. Bye-bye.